The black man is the original man of this earth. We can live under the sun and give us strength. The white man gets sunburned and cancer of the skin. Shot off the nose and the lips of our statues. Mad it was black faces staring back at you. They won't tell us about that, cause then we realize who we are.
The Egyptian writer Hunefer, H-U-N-E-F-E-R, in the papyrus of Hunefer said, quote, "We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon," unquote.
The Egyptian Book of the Dead is the ancient Egyptians' guide to the afterlife, and it may well be the world's first religious document. From the maverick archaeologist who plotted to smuggle it out of Egypt, the Egyptian Book of the Dead is a story as old as civilization, the first vision of Judgment Day. A book that may answer the questions mankind has been asking for millennia. Archaeologists have uncovered more than 25,000 copies of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the oldest text dating from 1500 BC. But it is here, at the British Museum, in the heart of 21st century London, that the famous Scroll of Ani, the finest example of the Egyptian Book of the Dead ever preserved, can be seen. Painted in approximately 1250 BC, it contains 65 prayers and magical spells, and over 150 colorful illustrations. This exquisite piece of work is one of the longest scrolls ever discovered. When unrolled, it measures an incredible 78 feet. The scroll was brought from Egypt in 1887 by a museum curator, Dr. Ernest Alfred Thompson Wallace Budge. He was a prolific author, writing over 100 books on Egyptology, most of which are still in print. He published some of the first translations of important Egyptian text. He collected thousands of artifacts, acknowledged as some of the finest examples of ancient art. By December 1887, he was back at the British Museum. With him, the complete Scroll of Ani.
For the first time, museum goers will be able to examine the entire Book of the Dead.
Though what Budge did next is viewed by some as archaeological vandalism.
When he got it back to the British Museum, he cut it into sections that he could work with. He arranged for it to be pasted to wooden boards so that it could be translated.
Budge spent the rest of his life at the British Museum as a keeper of Egyptian antiquities. Most of his 140 books are still in print.
I myself, until today, read his books. His books are very important. I think that the only bad thing about Budge, that he did steal antiquities.
Were it not for the massive amount of material that he published, there would not be the interest in Egyptology and ancient cultures that there is today.
The Scroll of Ani was his greatest contribution to the world of Egyptology. He never made a greater find, nor has anyone ever discovered any other scrolls as artistic or complete as Ani's Book of the Dead.
What you see down here is the lake of fire. Now we're gonna get deep. You can go get the Book of the Dead, study it, but have look at it very weary because it's written by a white man. The lake of fire is represented the interior of Africa. There's a lot of volcanoes in that area, okay? And what happened is when these plates, Africa is on the plate, Arabia is on the plate, a tectonic plate. And these plates is up under there and they spin, okay? And a lot of time they come up and they grind, okay? And that causes earthquake. So Arabia pulled away from Africa. And when it did, a lot of that land down in the region of Egypt, lower parts of Sudan is sunk in. That's why it's called the Nile Valley. You understand what I'm saying? But up in this region is a lot of volcanoes. And in our spirituality and our ancient history, we remember when a lot of those volcanoes went off. And it caused us to migrate further down the river. Okay? And so this is the lake of fire. And what you're seeing right here, this is the lotus, which means rebirth. You can see the lotus up here. You can see the lotus up there. See what I'm saying? And when it's talking about the four heads, it's talking about these four sons of Horus, which represents north, south, east, and west. Now, this is brought to us by Dr. Ben, and Dr. Ben brought this to us from the papyrus of Hunefa, which is dated at 1306, 1290 BCE. It says this: we, meaning us, you and I, African people, came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwell at the foothills of the mountain of the moon. Where is the foothills of the mountain of the moon? Number one, Mount Kilimanjaro in Kenya. Mount Rwenzori in Uganda. In the metal letter, it's called Ta-Netaru, meaning land of the gods and goddesses. We coming right here, we're looking at Lake Tana in Ethiopia. That's the origin of the Blue Nile. You got two branches. You got the White Nile, you got the Blue Nile. The White Nile come out of Uganda, the Blue Nile come out of Lake Tana. They meet up at Khartoum, become one river, and flow down to the Mediterranean. So when it says we, from the papyrus of Hunefa, we came from the beginnings of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountains of the moon. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Rwenzori. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Rwenzori.
At the time, it was widely assumed that Egyptian civilization sprang up suddenly in around 3000 BC with the arrival of the first pharaohs.
Many people had thought it had to be an invasion of a superior race. The exquisite beauty of the things that the Egyptian civilization created. At the turn of the century, people didn't want to believe this was coming out of Africa. They wanted to root it in Mesopotamia or even in Europe. In some ways, it was quite racist.
Few Egyptologists questioned the accepted idea that the pharaohs were foreign invaders, bringing rapid progress to a backward country. But with Quibel's discovery of a king who predated the pharaohs, cracks began to appear in this theory. The history books were about to be rewritten. Ancient Egypt. Traditionally, scholars thought this sophisticated society had arisen so suddenly, the pharaohs must have come from somewhere else.
Egyptologists looking at the great achievements of the pharaohs couldn't bring themselves to believe that Egyptian civilization had been created by North Africans, by the Egyptians themselves. They thought it must have been brought to Egypt from a more enlightened land, as they saw it, to the east, perhaps modern Mesopotamia.
Recent discoveries relating to the Scorpion King are showing just how wrong the early scholars were. A scene carved on a desert rock face suggests he played a key role in uniting the cities of Egypt 200 years before the first pharaoh. Around 10,000 BC, monsoon rains transformed the Sahara from a desert into a fertile land, home to elephants, ostriches, and many other animals that have long since vanished from the region.
The plants came, the animals followed, and finally man followed the animals. These people were hunters, gatherers, and fishers.
Rock art also seems to show that later, around 3,000 years before the pharaohs, the hunters of the Sahara turned into herdsmen of cattle. sheep and goats. Cooper has found traces of these nomads scattered across the vast desert. But then the rains dried up once more. The savanna began changing back into desert. The nomads began moving out. 1,000 years before the pharaohs, and they had mostly gone, spanning out in all directions through Africa. At the same time, settlements are found springing up in the Nile Valley, now no longer too damp and unhealthy. This period of climate change and migration could explain why Egyptian civilization arose when it did.
We might call the desiccation of the Sahara a motor of Africa's history.
It seems those who headed east to the Nile Valley took their desert culture with them.
They brought with them not only their economy and their way of living, they also brought with them their beliefs, their ideologies. And maybe some of this can be traced back even in the religion of ancient Egypt.
Egypt no longer seems to arise as if from nowhere with the pyramids or with the First Dynasty, but we can trace its origins right back into prehistory, and it puts a whole new light on the development of civilization in North Africa.
The glories of ancient Egypt, from its magnificent temples to its breathtaking burial chambers. Archaeologists have struggled to explain how this extraordinary society suddenly came into being 5,000 years ago. But now the latest in a series of discoveries is changing the way they think about the dawn of civilization itself. Jebel Chauti in southern Egypt, 10 miles to the west of the River Nile. Archaeologist John Darnell has been exploring this region for years. While tracing an early trade route through the arid landscape, he made a discovery that's shedding new light on one of Egypt's most intriguing rulers.
And this is a monument of a king scorpion and an actual attempt at a historical treatise of some event during the reign of King Scorpion.
The first sign he even existed was found 60 miles away from Jebel Chauti, at the ancient city of Hierakonpolis. In 1898, British archaeologist James Quibell unearthed a number of stone fragments covered in carvings. When he pieced them together, they formed a mace head. The sized version was clearly meant for ceremonial use. Among the decorations on its surface, Quibell found the unmistakable image of a scorpion. As he studied the scene in more detail, he realized the central figure looked like a pharaoh. His headdress was a crown of the type worn by kings throughout Egypt's history. Other pieces of royal regalia are plain to see.
He's wearing the royal kilt. He's also got a bull's tail that hangs down beside. These things are only worn by kings.
Just yards from where he'd found the mace head, Quibell made a second discovery. It helped locate King Scorpion's place in history.
This is the amazing object we call the normal palette, which has been called the first historical document in the world.
The intricate carving again reveals the image of a king. Two hieroglyphs feature on both sides, a catfish and a chisel. They spell out a name, Nama. The style of the carving is similar to the mace head depicting the Scorpion King. The figures even wear the same royal headdress. But there is a key difference. There's a second crown worn only by Nama. It reveals he ruled a far greater territory. Scholars of Quibell's time knew that ancient Egyptians saw their land as having two distinct halves.
There was Upper Egypt, which was the narrow Nile Valley in the south of the country, and Lower Egypt, which was the broad expanse of the delta in the north. And so when a single ruler came to dominate the entire country, the symbolism of his rule echoed those two halves of the country.
Typical portrayals of a pharaoh show him wearing both the tall crown of Upper Egypt and the very different crown of Lower Egypt. Scorpion seems to reign over the south, but Nama rules north and south. This is the earliest image ever found showing a king ruling over both halves of Egypt. Experts concluded that the scenes record the moment Egypt was unified and Nama, in victory, became its first pharaoh. The parallels with the mace head suggested the Scorpion King came from the same era.
Because the way that Nama is depicted on that palette is so similar to the way that the Scorpion King is shown on the mace head, we can deduce that the Scorpion King must have been a contemporary or even earlier than Nama, and so a king before the first dynasty.
Scorpion displayed many characteristics of a full pharaoh, but he came from an earlier age. Archaeologists had just opened a door on a whole new chapter of Egyptian history.
All these things existed before Kemet, okay? All of this existed up in Nubia. So, I mean, the cracker been known that what you call the Nile Valley civilization existed long before Kemet. Long before Kemet. Egypt is a baby, okay? Because we can easily go up into Nubia and show the people how it descended down the Nile and came into Kemet. Now, these are what they call the nomes. These are the districts. If you can see it, you see how they start to count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's coming from the south down. Now, when you get to Memphis, the first capital of Kemet, you see it start again at 1. All of this is Nubia. All of this existed before Kemet. When Nama came down there, he established Memphis, Ka Ptah, and this is what the Greeks got Egypticos from. Egypt-Ptah. This is where they get it from. So people need to know that. Over there at 14, when the Hyksos came in, they made that Avaris 14 their capital. So you can see right here that Amen, his district was 4. Assar, his district was 5. Tahuti, his district was 15. All of them letters existed before Egypt. All of them. Okay? And so, we have disputes out here that somehow the Asians brought science into Egypt. But they didn't keep none for themselves. Okay? They come into Africa and build pyramids, and they couldn't build nothing like that from where they came from. How the hell you gonna come in another man's land and build all these magnificent temples and pyramids and not build one in the land where you come from? That don't make no sense. It don't make no sense. So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa.
The first sign he even existed was found 60 miles away from Jebel Chauti, at the ancient city of Hierakonpolis.
I'm gonna go straight into the jungle of the cracker. I'm gonna go straight into the jungle of the cracker. You cannot have no mercy on these crackers. I'm gonna get on this little lowly cracker. I'm gonna get on his ass. I'm not gonna give him no chance. The original Egyptians, as we look into the text, cracker, that the first king of Kemet, the black lands, the land of the black people, that the first king of Kemet is Nama. And Nama comes up out of the south from Nikon, Hierakonpolis. That in the south, in Nubia, there is no Egypt until Nama unifies the land and establishes Memphis, Ka Ptah as the first capital of Kemet. He came out of the south. Cracker, before Nama establishes Egypt, before he establishes Memphis, Manetha, as the first capital of Egypt, what were the people? What were the people? They were Wasetians, Tassetians, Tanahisians. This is what they are. And so though Cracker, even at that time, I don't even know why I'm refuting, because your pale ass was still in the caves. You have not even crawled out of the cave. You have not even produced no writings in your own land. So how can you act as if you are a scholar in African history when you can't even show that at the same time in which you teaching, your people is still in the goddamn cave? Woo! You's a courageous cracker. You's a courageous cracker.
I'm black as them ancient Egyptians. Before European historians went and changed the description. I'm black as them ancient Egyptians. Before European historians went and changed the description.